Hey everyone! Today we are continuing in our social topics series and we are talking about alcohol and marijuana. So, by definition, alcohol is any liquid that can make you drunk, and marijuana is the dried leaves and flowers of the hemp plant that are smoked or consumed otherwise as a drug. So, why are we talking about these two things together? For starters, they both create an altered state of mind. They are both the most popular substances used at recreational activities and are often used together. And the consequences of marijuana are much closer to alcohol than to other drugs. So let's cover some basics. The uses of these drugs are recreational, meaning you just like the way that they feel and you like the way that you behave when you're using them. They can be medicinal. So if you have some sort of ailment, physical or mental, you can use one of these two substances to try and help you feel better. And the third is addiction, that we used it for either recreational or for medicinal purposes, and our bodies then got addicted to it. And in order to just stay at the level of functioning that we want to, we have to keep using these substances. So let's talk about the legality of these two things. Legally, in order to consume alcohol, you must be 21 years of age or older to consume it. If you do drink illegally, or if you just possess or distribute alcohol, that is a misdemeanor, so it's not a felony. With a misdemeanor, you could be fined up to $1,000 or imprisoned up to 1 year. And of course, in addition to fines, you could be fined, you have to pay for court costs and for attorney fees. Marijuana, recreational use, is still illegal in Missouri. Yes, it's legal in other states, but it is still illegal in Missouri. It is decriminalized, which means it's just like alcohol, it's not a felony to possess it. So if you do possess small amounts of it, it is just a misdemeanor. If you have large amounts of it or you sell it to others, that is still considered a felony, and those charges are much harsher if you get convicted. Medicinal use is now legal in Missouri. Important to note that the last time I gave this talk, it was not. So if you are prescribed by the doctor to use marijuana for an ailment, you can do that legally now. And to be very clear, by comparison, harder drugs like heroin and cocaine are a felony to possess in any quantity. So what does Scripture say about this? Scripture does not actually reference marijuana, as it is not a local plant to the Middle East. It also just doesn't mention drug use at all. I find that kind of interesting. It does mention alcohol, but there is not really a clear message for or against it. So like in Psalm chapter 104, verse 14 through 15, it says, God made grapes for making wine and that it cheers people's hearts. So saying specifically, God made grapes in order for us to drink wine. So that's interesting. And then, of course, the very popular passage from John's Gospel, where Jesus was at a wedding at Cana and he turned water into wine. And the scripture actually makes it clear that Jesus did this with the good wine. Like, he turned it into the good wine, which means it was old, which means it was potent. It was designed to get people drunk. Okay, so this was the culture of the time, and Jesus was not only participating in the culture, he helped it with a miracle from God. All right, so there's some scriptures that kind of make it look like God's okay with this whole alcohol thing. Then you get to Ephesians chapter 5, and Paul says pretty clearly, do not be filled with drunkenness, but with the Spirit. So there you go. And if you look back into the Old Testament, there are lots and lots of stories in the Old Testament where people are doing really bad stuff because they got drunk first. So that drunkenness led to a lot of bad decision making that then God's like, shouldn't have done that. So I'm getting kind of some mixed messages from Scripture. So what does the United Methodist Church say about it? And this is the global UMC, not necessarily Manchester UMC. It calls both of these substances gateway drugs, meaning that if you use one of these, you are more likely to engage in others. We have found that over time, as long as the substances are legal, that's not necessarily the case, that gateway drugs across the board is not like a thing. For individuals, it can be. If you try alcohol and marijuana and you're like, okay, well then I wonder what heroin is like. Yeah, like obviously that can be the case. But overall, it's like if you do this, then you will be a lot more likely to try harder stuff. We know that that's actually not the case. It also acknowledges the medicinal use, so the UMC acknowledges medicinal uses of marijuana, but still teaches abstinence for recreational purposes. It does actually teach and encourage alcohol abstinence as well. Fun fact, the UMW, United Methodist Women, back in the 1920s, were the leaders towards prohibition, and they got it done. They got a lot of other people supporting them, obviously, but there was a period of a few years in our history where alcohol was illegal. It didn't last long, but there you go. Fun fact, the United Methodist Women were a driving force behind our country's experiments with abstinence. The United Methodist Church also points out that abstinence helps other people who are addicted. So that's alcohol addiction is a really big problem, right? Like this can ruin your entire life. And so if we are abstinent, we can be in support and solidarity with those who are addicted by also abstaining. The UMC also puts a lot of emphasis on compassion for individuals who are addicted. So rather than shaming them, we want to help them. In addition, we don't see drinking or drug use as an automatic gateway to hell. We don't explicitly state it as sinful. The UMC, fun fact, states nothing as explicitly sinful. It leaves that up to personal discretion of the individual and of the individual's community. And just like any other substance, habit, or possession, it can directly interfere in our ability to love God and to love others. It can make us less compassionate, it can make us less logical, we can make less thoughtful decisions, and it can make us physically unable to do important work. Like it's hard to rebuild somebody's house that's been destroyed by a tornado if we're drunk. Funnily enough, the UMC also makes it a point to have people who are avoiding substances to avoid self-righteousness, that if you choose to abstain from alcohol or marijuana, that you don't parade yourself around going like, look at me, look how awesome I am, I'm sober and you're not. It's like, nope, don't do that. All right, so let's talk about some benefits and some dangers of substance use. So some benefits, obviously, people use it to relax, and it can help us actually relax. It can also help us have fun. And it's communal. It's something that can bring a community together when we're all doing this together. Okay, so let's shift towards the dangers. For both alcohol and marijuana, if you use it during your teenage years, you can interfere with your normal brain development. There are also some acute consequences that can come, such as just physical injuries, sexual assault, and in the case of alcohol, not marijuana, you can have death simply by consuming too much alcohol. And to be clear about the sexual assault piece, if you are sexually assaulted while you are high, that does not mean it is your fault. However, if there is somebody out there who is looking to harm somebody in that way, they can look, and often do look, for somebody who is high because they know that they're an easier target because they're just less able to defend themselves. It's not okay. It's just the reality of what we're dealing with. All right. Alcohol, actually, through lots of different means, through alcohol poisoning or through alcohol-related deaths such as driving, it makes up the third leading preventable cause of death in the United States. Okay, so if anybody tries to ever tell you alcohol is not dangerous, they're lying to you. It is dangerous. So is other things like rock climbing can be dangerous, right? But we need to acknowledge the risks and how they weigh and benefit out with the fun part. Drinking and driving, we need to really talk about this. If you do that, you could lead to jail time. You could get fined pretty heavy. You could even lose your license. And most importantly, you could kill yourself. You could kill somebody else. In 2014, alcohol impaired driving fatalities accounted for 31% of overall driving fatalities. And so you might be saying to me like, well, Beth, I already know that. We already hear that, right? Like, don't drink and drive. I'll never drink and drive. The reality is that when you're actually faced with that decision, if you are at a party or you're somewhere and you have your car, it is really, really inconvenient to leave without your car. And so that temptation to drink and drive is much, much higher when you're there in that moment staring down the other possibilities. Like, if you call an Uber, that's money, and now you've got to come back and get your car the next day. If you call your parents, that's an uncomfortable conversation, right? If you try and get a ride, there might not be somebody else who's sober at the party who can drive you home. So we like to say it, but we have to be really committed to this idea of we're not going to drink and drive, because been in that situation where that temptation is really, really high. Underage possession, we've already talked about that, is still illegal, which runs a lot of risks. Addiction is a very real risk. If you are the type of person who gets easily addicted to things, you're going to be probably more likely to get addicted to a substance, and that can end up having dire consequences for all the rest of your goals in life. If you want to finish school, if you want to get a job, if you want to have a family, alcohol can ruin all of those. Alcohol addiction can ruin all of those things. It can also lead to, of course, strained relationships with parents, and it can impact your emotional state. I know a bunch of people that say, like, I actually stopped drinking because I found that every time I drank and got drunk, I got depressed, and then it took a long time for that depression to leave. Let's talk about marijuana. So again, underage possession is a big deal, runs risks. Using and driving is not quite as dangerous as using alcohol and driving, but it does also impair your perception and your psychomotor performance. The biggest probably danger, in my opinion, of marijuana is that it's not regulated, because recreational use is not legal yet. No matter how much you trust your provider, it could be laced with something heavier. And if you get something that is laced, that can be very, very dangerous for you. If you smoke, marijuana can lead to breathing problems and lung diseases. We already talked about when you're a teenager, that if you use it a lot, it can actually stunt your brain development to the point where you might not ever recover what you lose, because our brains are still in this development phase until we're 25. And so if you're using heavily before then, you can lose out on some of that work that just won't happen later on in life. And same with alcohol, it can impact your emotional state in a negative way, and it can also strain your relationship with your parents. So what should you do? Due to the risks of your physical health, your mental health, your legal record, and your parental relationships, we at Manchester UMC strongly encourage you to abstain from both of these substances until you are of legal age. Our job here at church, my job, is to love you. And this recommendation is truly the best way that I can love you, that we here at church can love you. If you do go against our advice, please know that we at Manchester Youth fall in line with the UMC's approach, and we care for you rather than shaming you or exiling you. It's just not who we are or what we do. Also, if you don't follow our advice, please reduce your risk by choosing not to drive and being with a buddy who is sober, who can watch out for you. There will be a time when you will be presented with the choice to say yes or no to alcohol and marijuana. So to help you respond in that moment, I encourage you to spend time in thought and prayer before it comes up or comes up again. So you can ask yourself these questions. Is this something you actually want? Or are you only considering it to try because you want to look cool or fit in or impress somebody else? Those aren't really great reasons to do anything. Is this something you will have to lie about later? And how will you feel about lying? How does this action help you? How will it hurt you both in the short term and in the long term? What will happen if you get caught? How will you feel about your decision later on? And most importantly, what do you think God is calling you to do? If alcohol has already become a problem for you or your friend, and by that I mean it's causing significant difficulties in your life or your functioning, what options do you have? Well, first, drug and alcohol addiction is a disease. It's actually classified as a disease. And so if this is your case, you need actual medical treatment, physically or mentally. You need to tell a trusted adult so you can get this treatment. And please know that you are completely and fully loved by God and by us. So as you seek help, please keep that in mind. Please always remember that. All right, one last thing before I say goodbye for the day. If you do talk to us about stuff that you're dealing with, we have to follow confidentiality rules. So if you tell us in such a way that it sounds like you are at risk to yourself or to somebody else, we have to then tell other people, okay? So that doesn't necessarily mean like you tell us that you went to a party 3 weeks ago and had a few drinks, like that's not, you're not at risk currently to yourself or somebody else. But if you do tell us other things in addition to that take us over that line, we have to tell other people. So just want to make that very clear. All right, friends, I hope y'all have a great discussion in your small groups today, and I will see you next time. Bye.